Good morning. My name is Mary Charlson, and we're going to take you on an adventure to Western Australia today. So let me hop over here and share my screen. This morning, I'm going to take you somewhere hot, sunny, and warm. Kind of a nice reprieve on a cold, wet October day in Vancouver. As has been previously mentioned, my name is Mary Charlson, and I'm a marketing and media thought leader by my day job, president of Charlson Communications and CEO of 5minutemarketing.com. But by my, kind of my passion, my off my desk side job, I'm the founder of carryonqueen.com, which is increasingly becoming more of my business and my focus. In fact, I've kind of mixed the two, often now doing marketing and media consulting within the travel industry. But today, I'm going to take you on an adventure, and it's all part of that, the Carry On Queen brand, which is the website you see here. Yes, I am known as the Carry On Queen because I only ever travel and pack with a bag that I can carry on the plane. I've done that for years for business and for recreation and leisure. And that's just kind of one of the things that I've always done and will continue to do. So during past Elder College presentations, the Carry On Queen has taken you globetrotting both in person and online. And it's my pleasure to be back with you today in an online environment. What adventures we've had. We went hiking to Machu Picchu in Peru in a face-to-face presentation in 2018. We went hiking in Italy's Dolomites in 2019 in another face-to-face presentation. And then in 2020, we went motorbiking on Route 66. We went hiking in the Grand Canyon and Zion National Park in an online virtual environment. And that's where we find ourselves again this morning. Here again in 2021, we're still experiencing restrictions brought on by the pandemic. How ironic then that we get to go visit virtually a country currently still closed off to international travelers. That's Australia. You know what they say in marketing, being denied the ability to have something often makes you want to have it more. And I'm pretty sure after we take our tour through some of these day trips in Western Australia, you're going to want to go and visit that state and the country of Australia. So when we think of Australia, we often think of beaches. Really, really nice beaches. In fact, Western Australia has the whitest sandy beaches in all of Australia. Might be a good reason to go and visit. But when we think of Australia, we also think of kangaroos. Sometimes kangaroos on beaches. We often think of, Sydney, the Opera House, kind of on the East Coast. That comes to mind when we think Australia. Ayers Rock in the middle of Australia is iconic. And perhaps we also conjure up, images of the Great Barrier Reef. All of these things come to mind in Australia. Or even memories of this guy, Crocodile Dundee, and a few of the scary creatures that the country seems to harbor. Crocodiles, snakes, spiders. Don't let that scare you off. The trip I'm going to take you on to Australia was made in March, April 2019, before the wildfires of November 2019 to February 2020, and before the March 2020 beginning of the pandemic closed the country down, which is where the current state is. If I'd only known what was coming. But essentially, this, March, April of 2019 was one of the last windows to visit Australia during their summer. So I feel quite honored to be able to share that experience with you today. On that trip, I initially was over on the East Coast. I learned to kite surf out of Noosa. I drove, I had some business contacts in Brisbane. I drove up and down the coast here to Sydney. I watched my daughter play rugby. I watched my son compete at Newton's in a longboard event. I had business meetings in Sydney as well as business meetings down in Melbourne. Had a great time on the East Coast, but it was during that trip that I made the flight over to Perth. And that's the part of this this Australia experience in the state of Western Australia that I'm going to share with you today. So many people only venture up and down that east coast through the state of Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. Far fewer make the trek over to Western Australia. Perth is 3 time zones away from Sydney. In fact, Perth to Sydney is a 41-hour drive, covering 3,944 kilometers. To give that a little Canadian context, Vancouver to Montreal is a 45-hour drive. So but a little over 4,000 kilometers. So it's actually reasonably close to that kind of distance. So any wonder why a lot of people don't make the trip over to the other side of the country. But it's definitely worthwhile. This morning, we're going to take 2 day trips from Perth, and Perth being the major city in Western Australia. I'll talk a little bit about Perth at the very end, but we're going to spend our time on the 2 day trips. We're going to go touring and snorkeling on Rottnest Island off Perth. And we're also going to go surfing at the Wedge with a bunch of fun-loving, active baby boomers. But first up, we need to pack. My whole thing is about packing light and experiencing more. As you know, the carry-on queen, that is my motto. And we have to, get everything we need into one bag. Yep, one bag for that travel. I was gone for over 4 weeks on this trip, which included business meetings in Sydney and Melbourne, as I mentioned, kite surfing in Queensland, hiking on the East Coast, hosteling at some point, dining and dancing, biking, surfing. I bridged it, I also bridged late summer to early fall during this time period, and climate zones ranging from tropical up in Noosa to the north to more Vancouver-like in Melbourne, 2,000 kilometers to the south. So needless to say, everything that went in that bag was lightweight, served multiple purposes, and didn't wrinkle. So let's go on a surf trip to the Wedge. I went with 4 baby boomers living like they were in their 20s. I'm pictured here with Martine to my right, her husband and Yui and sister Colleen. Martine and I have been pen pals since we were 12, and our mums met on a train trip across Canada to Vancouver and suggested that we get together and we write. And we've been doing that regularly over the years. Pen and paper initially, more recently through electronic means. And we've stayed in touch. We've visited each other both in Australia and in Canada over the years, and we've become great family friends. So it was my pleasure to be able to go surfing with this motley crew. The Wedge, that's what the Aussies call it, is the area to surf around Wedge Island up here. And it's about 2 hours north of Perth by car. We can see it pictured here, is the drive up the coast. Reasonably remote. There's really only one way to get to Wedge Island, and that's by road. So you'll either need friends with a 4x4 or rent a car, which is a 4x4. Out of Perth, it's State Route 60, 160 kilometers, and then there's a bunch of little back roads for the last 20K. There's a few suburban settlements, stretching out from Perth along the way, but after that, it's mostly just wind-blown dunes mixed with tufts of kind of vegetation and the odd kangaroo along the way. Truly, you are getting away from pretty much everything. Could there be anything more fun than a car full of 50-plus-year-old friends roaring down the highway, tunes playing with 6 surfboards on the roof, throwing caution to the wind? I think not. We departed Perth early morning, absolutely giddy with anticipation. Wedge Island and this is Wedge Island where we drove along, to get to our surf spot. Wedge Island is actually one of 40 islands within the Turquoise Coast Islands Nature Reserve. It's accessible only by 4x4 vehicle. For the most part, sand dunes, and it's untouched, and the beach stretches unpopulated for miles. This is a very different experience than a lot of the beaches on the east coast of Australia. Certainly you can find some that are uninhabited, but this just stretches for miles. And look at that, absolutely fine, fine white sand. It's almost like baby powder fine. It's unbelievable. Wedge Island, a bit of surf history. Wedge Island is also home to a settlement of kind of haphazard beach shacks that were built in the 1950s, constructed mostly from corrugated metal and salvaged wood. Some of these buildings are kind of best viewed as adult versions of tree forts on the ground. They've stood the test of time. Some have taken on modern design touches, and others have been kind of reclaimed by blowing sand and wind and essentially buried and forgotten. It's a bit of a haphazard little bits of settlements here. It really does appear to stand the test of time. It's a quiet place that kind of guards fierce loyalty from a generation raised experiencing it. And people return year after year to re-experience some of their youthful memories from Wedge Island. So driving and getting to the beach, in Australia, it's common for cars to drive on beaches, but they must be 4x4s, since they can then get stuck in the sand, not unlike being stuck in the snow here in Canada. So access to the Wedge is through a sand dune, sort of best described as the equivalent of a wind-blown snowdrift at points. So definitely that 4x4 was needed. My friends insisted on switching up and letting me drive, which was quite fun to sort of see how the vehicle responded in the deep sand. And literally, it was like driving in loose wind-blown snow here in Canada. And of course, the right-hand drive added, and standard, added to the extra fun and but unfamiliarity, of course. I jokingly offered to signal when they indicated that we should go right, or I should say go right, at the beach area. But clearly there was no need. We were the only one of a couple of vehicles on the beach that day. The day that we were there was the beginning of April, and it was blistering hot, about 37 degrees Celsius, plus the sun was absolutely intense. The fine white powder sand at the Wedge is in contrast to the blue sky, the light aqua colored sea. It's really quite something. In a country that is defined by the beauty of beaches on both sides, both coasts, you might be hard pressed to declare, the best one. But the Wedge in Western Australia is easily a contender for a top prize for isolated beauty. Wedge Island surf delivers consistent wave sets, with the wave size kind of dependent on the weather conditions. Now, the day that we were there and visited, it was perfect for beginner and intermediate surfers. As you can see, it doesn't look too gnarly, which I was quite happy to see. So after driving along the beach for 10 minutes, we parked by the dune and unloaded our surf gear. I had done some kite surfing on the east coast of Australia earlier in the trip, but the Wedge promised something quite special. Indeed. I haven't done a ton of surfing. I did a little bit in Nicaragua. I did a little bit on the East Coast, but I'd also had a little bit of a shoulder injury. And so I was really kind of being cautious there because I wasn't with anyone in particular. So a little bit more cavalier once I got with my friends over in Australia. So hopping from the car and its protected air conditioned environment, we were hit with just like a blast of windy hot air. But we were giddy with anticipation as everyone kind of suited up, donned their rashies, which is a rash guard. It's a shirt that you wear to kind of protect your bathing suit, but also your body against board rash, right? Kind of rubbing on it. We put on surf shorts and bathed our bodies in sunscreen. So SPF 50+ sunscreen was the order of the day. So the sun was wickedly intense and the air was pumping waves of heat at us. But once we were immersed in the water, the ocean water, all was right. Or as they would say, all was right. Ready to hit the waves at Wedge Island. My friend set me up with a longboard and it made me a bit of a hero out there initially. We switched things up later on, but the longer board was definitely a little easier, a little bit more flotation, and also gave me a little bit more grace for that kind of the, like the snap, the pull up to be able to get from a laying down position to a standing position. And it actually offered me an opportunity to actually hold my balance for a little bit to be able to ride that wave, as opposed to, on the shorter board, I'd sort of pull up, go to stand and I was over. A bit of a washing machine at times on the shortboard. So the waves were gentle, by more experienced surfer standards, but at around 2 to 3 meters, they came in consistent, predictable sets and were delivered over a long, shallow reach without undertow, which was really key to enjoying the experience. And that allowed us to catch repeated runs and long rides. The waves made us heroes on our boards, consistent enough to believe that we were actually better than we thought. And for a few brief moments that afternoon, this group of longtime friends relived our youth. At least that's the movie that we played in our heads. I'll freely admit, it may not have been the movie that others were watching that afternoon. We surfed until exhaustion kicked in. And later, with the thunderstorm brewing on the horizon, that also began to kind of threaten our safety. We bailed once there were flashes of lightning visible in the distance. With smiles permanently etched on our faces and with tan squint lines to prove it, we packed up the 4x4 and headed back to Perth late in the afternoon. We were a car full of parents, feeling like tired kids, doing our best to hold a conversation while fighting off head bobs and yawns. Not unlike sort of driving, a couple of kids back from skiing, a day at Whistler, and you're bobbing in the back, barely able to kind of hold a conversation. We appreciate a good night's sleep once we were back at home, and I'm pretty sure that we still had visions of those, the surf kind of dancing in our heads. I'm going to play you a little bit of a video which kind of summarizes the fun that we had there. A little music to kind of get you going. Oh, we got the live action here. So you can kind of see the dunes, right?
Do I need to signal? No. Keep going.
Oops. So, of course, this is a video which I have embedded in a blog post on my Carry On Queen site, and also on my YouTube channel for Carry On Queen. So I thought I would just kind of share that one with you because it's a kind of a fun visual of what we did there. So just a few things before we leave Wedge Island, just about accommodations and stuff while you're staying there. You don't have to stay in a surf shack. In fact, I think it would be very difficult to actually find these to book. I think they're all kind of owned by, old-time families, although there might well be some if you were casting around on Airbnb or VRBO, but there is ample accommodation available in Lancelin area, a little bit further south of the beach. It's that would also be legal to boot, because I know that kind of renting some of those surf shacks, I think might be quite difficult to do it legally, because I know they quite protect it. Lancelin's about 30 kilometers south of the Wedge. Hotels range $120, $140 a night. There's also a YHA hostel for $58 a night if you're feeling youthful, or a caravan park with sites, priced at $20 per person if you're camping. Lancelin has its own beach area too, but the more coveted kind of pristine, isolated experience definitely hop in the car and drive the extra distance up north. As I mentioned previously, you definitely want to have a 4x4 to drive the beach, and you'll need to know your tides to navigate getting in and out of the area safely. You don't want to mess up and find yourself swamped in waves and with a car and lose a car to the surf. So you definitely need to know that you're kind of coming and going in on low tides and taking kind of mechanically sound vehicle that also is not going to kind of leave you stranded and then as the tide is coming in. That adds a whole lot of stress to an otherwise pretty relaxed day surfing. So let's switch up, come back to Perth, and then go out on another day trip. This time we're going to go to Rottnest Island and have some fun with a few interesting creatures that you'll meet on Rottnest Island. First up, let's give you some perspective here. So Rottnest Island, or Rotto, as the locals call it, is an island 18 kilometers off the coast of Perth. From Vancouver, it's just a short 14.5-hour flight to Sydney, pretty much the other side of the world on the opposite hemisphere. Then a 5-hour, 3-time zone flight across Australia to Perth. Then chase it with a 30-minute transfer downtown and a 30-minute commute train to Perth, the city center, to Fremantle, and then take a 25-minute ferry ride from the suburb of Fremantle. Rottnest Island is pretty much as physically far from Vancouver as you can get while still being on land. Now, that doesn't make it a bad place to visit. In fact, that probably should make it even more appealing for you, as you're about to find out. So, Rotto is a gem. Few travelers make the trek to Perth, as we said, when visiting Australia, and far fewer make it to Rottnest Island. But it's the only place in the world where you're going to find quokkas. What's a quokka, you might ask? Well, quokkas are quite possibly the cutest, most curious creatures that you'll ever encounter. Besides your dog, of course. Rottnest Island is most famously known for quokkas. They're, I would say, almost the world's happiest animal. These adorable little furry marsupials, they kind of appear like a cross between a miniature kangaroo, a bunny, an oversized rat, and a squirrel, if you can kind of envision that. And they're known for their curious and friendly nature. In fact, if you've ever witnessed an Aussie going nuts about squirrels in Stanley Park, because Australia doesn't have squirrels. So if you've ever witnessed an Aussie kind of like, taking photos all over the place of squirrels in Stanley Park, it's pretty much the equivalent of a Canadian infatuation with quokkas. Frankly, I couldn't get enough of them, and they were all over the island. Quokkas are remarkably friendly, although you still shouldn't touch them. We witnessed one who had curled up under a cover of a baby stroller while the family was at the beach, only to remain stubbornly in place once discovered, nestled in the blankets, looking out, wondering, what was all the fuss about? And when we beckoned, to pose for a selfie with a quokka, they often curiously tilt their head and kind of smile. It's really quite funny. Rottnest is a unique destination which developed in geographic isolation from the rest of Australia. So it's the only place on Earth with quokkas. 17th century Dutch sailors thought that the generous population of fuzzy rodents were large rats and named the island Rottnest, meaning rat's nest in Dutch. And that's how the name Rottnest Island came about. In the past, the island has served as a penal colony, army barracks, and prisoner of war camp, but now it's just a lovely holiday destination. I'd been to Perth back in my 20s during a backpacking trip, but making it a step further to Rottnest Island had eluded me. This time, I was determined to make it. So I found myself being packed off with the husband of my lifelong friend and childhood pen pal, since she was teaching for the day and Yui had the day off. And he sensed that I was a game companion for adventure. Ferries from Perth to Rottnest Island operate 6 to 7 times a day in off-peak season. It's 10 to 12 times a day in peak season, which is December to February is their peak because their winter is kind of our summer. and their summers are winter by contrast. We met at B Shed in Fremantle to catch the ferry. Yui had 2 bikes, snorkels, fins, masks, plus swim towels, carry bags, snacks, and a vessel of sunscreen fit to bathe in. He was not only in charge of ensuring that I had a memorable day, but it also would appear making sure that I didn't come back burnt to a crisp. We cycled 25 kilometers return around the island in the hot sun that day, and there's very, very little kind of cover from the sun in terms of shade. Aussies don't mess when it comes to sunscreen. SPF 50 plus in the equivalent of a milk jug container, as you can see here in perspective with the size of it to Huey's hand. Rottnest ferry tickets are best booked online in advance, since walk-on ferries do fill to capacity and sell out. You could also check out Get Your Guide, to get a deal on an advance booking. You can hire a bike or snorkel gear online, or any number of organized activities. Apparently, tandem skydiving over Rotto is a thing. Yeah, we didn't do it, but we booked a morning trip out with a 5 p.m. return the same day. There is accommodation on the island, ranging from cabins to glamping and in camping, but reserving in advance is absolutely necessary, and it often books out well in advance during peak season in particular. The easiest way to see this car-free island if you're on foot is by the hop-on, hop-off shuttle bus. In fact, it's a car-free island other than buses. But you can also rent bikes on the island or take them over on the ferry as we did. If you do take your own and you're booking the ferry, you need to note that you have an accompanying bike and to make sure that they've got room for that in the reservation. But you can also, as you can see here, book in advance and pick up a bike on the other side. So we got off at Thompson Bay, and the first stop was Rottnest Bakery. I had been promised the best meat pie in Australia, or as he would say, yeah, we got the best meat pie in Australia. No, that wasn't very good, but you get the idea, meat pie. Anyway, got to work on my Aussie accent, but it certainly didn't disappoint. So, so with a solid hit of steak, bacon, and cheese and pastry in our bellies, we were on our way. We also packed some sweets and some stuff for later. We biked around the whole island that day. Henrietta Rocks and Little Salmon Bay was the first snorkel destination. And you can see just gorgeous area off, again, white sandy beaches. Not a lot of people there. It's a very kind of, there's a very cool old shipwreck and oodles of tropical fish within a couple of meters of the surface at Henrietta Rocks. It was the perfect location for some snorkeling. In fact, it was almost like being in a tropical fish tank. So cool. Although I had yet to master the Aussie gal kind of fine art of changing into a bikini while wrapped in a towel in public view, I gave it my best shot. Fortunately, Huey was saved from the back curtain peep show, but some folks in the hop-on, hop-off bus, some tourists had just arrived, and they did get a little bit more than they bargained for that morning. However, I was working on that Aussie towel. I don't know how they do it, right? Like just behind the towel, yeah, they're changed. It was really quite fun. So that morning, the water is a bit wavy, but it was warm, clear, and it was really like being in a human-sized aquarium, as I mentioned. Rottnest is home to 135 species of tropical fish, compared to 11 species recorded off the metropolitan coastline. So it truly is a very different experience just going that short trip away from Perth. Truly, the snorkeling is quite something. We cycled the far west end of the island, all the way over to the far west side, past Porpoise Bay, Fairbridge Bluff, and Rocky Bay, and really geographically diverse areas. Some were big wind and waves, which had attracted surfers and kiteboarders that day. We didn't do that, but we watched them and thought, oh, that looks really cool. But it was pretty gnarly wind off that side, so I think I would have been maybe a little bit overpowered compared to my Noosa kite experience. I was still kind of learning on it. So here's an island map, and as you can see here at the top end is where the island jetty, where the ferries get off, and so we kind of embarked here and went what I would say kind of clockwise around, went out to the point, back, in around this way. And that was kind of our day trip. It's the perfect island to cycle because there is no car traffic except for the island shuttle bus. And there's just only so many of those around. So it's really, really relaxing. We passed Roland Smith Memorial, an area called Cathedral Rocks, where there's a colony of New Zealand fur seals gathering. So there's lots of really interesting little places to stop along the way as you do this. And the beaches all along this side, along this area on this coast. This is where you get a little bit more of the wind and kind of more of the surf and the kite surfing. The beaches here and the beaches here were the ones with the pristine white sand. This is some seals off Cathedral Rocks, the viewing platform. We watched them kind of frolic for quite a long time. The area itself is closed to diving and boating, so it's made it for a spectacular natural habitat viewing opportunity. While we were there in April, we didn't see any humpback or southern right whales migrating north, as they often do in April. So that's something if you're there kind of into that fall season of April, their fall being our spring, sometimes you can see the whales migrating. The whales are known to linger in the calm waters off Rottnest at that time of year in April, and then they return in September to December with newborn calves. Again, playing in the calm and warm waters off the island, returning to the colder southern seas later. So after that, it was back along the north side of the island towards Catherine Bay and Gordy Bay, with stops at Pinky's Beach and later the Basin, where we did some more snorkeling, swimming, and of course, relaxing. That's what you do in Australia. We were on the watch for stingrays, which often kind of cruise the shallows of Thompson Bay. And I'm absolutely certain that I stirred one up, of course, from a safe distance in the basin. As you can see, Rottnest is an oasis of sand, warm aqua blue water, and recreational fun. More snorkeling in the basin. This is actually where I kind of stirred up that stingray. And you can kind of see how it might happen, right? Because you kind of got the rocks, a bit of coral kind of stuff around here, and they kind of blend in, right? And I kind of touched something with my flipper, and this thing kind of went off. I thought, I'm pretty sure that was a stingray. And so I came back and I asked Huey about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's stingray. Yeah, they're there." It's like, oh, okay. Rottnest is also home to 9 salt lakes, kind of a unique ecosystem that actually covers 10% of the island in the middle. Apparently, the lakes are 4 times saltier than seawater and therefore attract a much higher concentration of beta carotene bearing algae, which grows on the salt crystals. And that's what gives it kind of the reddish orange color, which is, again, kind of an interesting thing to watch. There are, of course, quokka sightings, right? And we can see one right here. The island is estimated to be home to over 10,000 quokkas. So your chances are pretty good of seeing one or many are pretty excellent. They tend to hang out in little bushy areas, roadside in the shade, and will happily kind of scurry about and engage tourists who stop to give them attention. So this is kind of typical of kind of like those little brushes and, you know, kind of little area that's a little bit more in the shade. And that's some typical of an area you might find them. It's actually against the law to touch or feed them, which makes for an interesting challenge when you're trying to arrange for a selfie, because they're so friendly. So this is one of Huey trying to kind of capture a little bit of a selfie with the quokka, but being careful not to touch them. Quokkas are much more, are most often spotted in in the shade of the bushes, but certainly they do kind of come out. Quite possibly, the curious. Most curious creatures, and they definitely do smile, right? Like you just like a head tilt and a little smile. It's almost like they were born for the Instagram generation. They are marsupial. They actually are nocturnal. But that's why sort of seeing them early morning or towards the evening, you can sort of see more of them. But as I said, they will come out because they are so curious. So, while it was an activity-packed day, we made it safely back in time for our 5 p.m. ferry to Fremantle. Ferries from Fremantle to Rottnest are passenger only. I forgot to mention that early on. Multiple ferries line the dock to return day trippers to the mainland each day, as we can see here. And the ferry ride from Rotto back to Fremantle takes about 45 minutes. We took the ferry from Fremantle, but there is also a ferry from Rottnest from the main Perth City jetty, but that one takes 90 minutes. So a lot of people go down, take the rapid transit train down to Fremantle, or they drive to Fremantle and go from there, because they can go by car and leave the car parked in Fremantle. And after dinner with friends in Perth and some wine to help kind of liberate our stories, my head couldn't hit the pillow in bed soon enough. It was another very big, full, active day. So what to pack? And here's the island. You can see those salt lakes. Now, in this particular picture, they look pretty blue, but I think it really kind of depends on the angle of the sun and kind of the time of year when you get the algae bloom happening. But these are the lakes that get that kind of that pink salt crystal. So Rottnest Island itself is 11 kilometers long. So if you're cycling for the day, you can sort of count on logging kind of 25 to 30K, right? So you get up here at the jetty and you kind of go around down to here and back around this way. It's relatively flat with some rolling hills. Temperatures range in the mid-20s to mid-30s with a sea breeze during the summer. But there is limited shade, as I mentioned. So you need to bring lots of sunscreen. As you know, Huey had me covered. A hat for sure, sunglasses, and water. There are quite a number of water refill stations throughout the island. So it's best to replenish your bottle when you're given the opportunity. Even if you're taking the hop on, hop off bus, I would still provision water as you see it, as I said, because there's little shade, and the Aussie sun really does take a toll regardless of your physical output. And don't forget to pack your bathing suit, or your swimmers, as the Aussies like to call it, a towel. And if you want to get some up close, kind of personal with some of the best snorkeling, be sure to best snorkeling, I would say, almost outside of the Great Barrier Reef, and I've done snorkeling on the reef. Definitely pack along a snorkel, fins, mask, or rent some when you're over there. When to go? Since Australia is in the Southern Hemisphere, the summer season runs November to February. That's their summer. It does get cooler during the winter and autumn, so beaches wouldn't be sort of fantastic during those months, I would say. Over the years, Rottnest Island has become a popular destination for high school graduation trips. So something known as Schoolies, which is kind of Schoolies Week. It's a celebration, usually takes place kind of the third week, 3 weeks following graduation. So it's kind of beginning mid-November. So it's likely a good idea to avoid that time period unless you want to be surrounded by a bunch of intoxicated 17 and 18-year-olds. The island does get busy during also the Rottnest Channel Swim, which is in February, and the Port to Pub Swim in March. So you need to kind of be mindful of kind of events and holidays as well that could impact, especially if you are even just trying to book a ferry, but if you were going to get accommodation for sure. Our visit in early April was lovely. Not crazy busy, although certainly popular, with moderate temperatures in the 20s and mid-30s midday. So some tips for quokka selfies. Use a selfie stick. I know selfie stick seems a little self-serving, but they can really kind of help you get quokka, give the quokka some space and help you get some pictures. I didn't have mine, but fortunately my reputation as Long Arm Mary, Long Arm Mary came to the rescue. Because remember, you don't want to touch them, you don't want to feed them. So a couple tips: turn your flash off, number one, switch to burst mode, or do a video and then grab a still later from that, and then you'll be able to kind of get the perfect kind of expression. Wait for quokkas to find some food on the ground. This is when they stop moving and they kind of focus on chewing. Squat down or lie down to the ground, kind of get a little closer to them. And as I mentioned, since they're nocturnal, the best time to find a quokka is early morning or evening, but you'll always find several sleep-deprived ones kind of scattering about during the daytime, simply because they're so curious. Quokkas like cooler places, so we often find them sheltered from the sun in the shade of the bushes by the roadside. So let's take you on another fun video of the day. They just look like a mini kangaroo. And just like the other video, that's one that's I used. It's on my YouTube channel, but it's also buried within the blog post that I wrote in a little bit more detail about the trip to both Rottnest for this video and the other one for surfing the Wedge. So some tips. Getting a pocket guide. I love the Lonely Planet series of guides. I know there's one for Australia on its own, but there's also one for West Coast Australia to be able to get into kind of some of the details with over on that coast. I think they're great for planning, and also just that if you're going to spend some time around Perth or Perth and Fremantle, getting one of the little pocket guides is also worthy because it's really small. It kind of fits in your pocket. But the Lonely Planet guides, I use them for pre-planning, but I take them along because they're a decent size, and I find them invaluable for sourcing restaurants, accommodations, all sorts of tips, local tips. Western Australia has far fewer tourists than Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. Everyone seems to want to hit Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, all the points in between, but they kind of forget or they think it's too far to venture to Western Australia. And as you can see, it is worth the trip. Perth weather is always fine, right? They talk about the weather being fine. Their summer is our winter. In fact, here's a little bit of a graph of temperatures. And as you can see here, they're kind of peak summertime, kind of December coming into November, December, January, February, March, well up into the 30s or, mid 20s. But even during the winter or the shoulder seasons here, right, they're in the 20s. It's pretty sweet. And even in July and August, we're really just, we're still barely kind of bringing the thermometer down here. It still feels pretty temperate for us in Vancouver. Rainy season, they get a little bit more rain here as well, but again, it's limited. Perth really does have spectacular weather. My suggestion is base out of Perth and then explore on day trips. Perth is the city of Perth is the capital of the state of Western Australia. Population is 2.1 million people, so it's not a little back row city. It is a big metropolis, cosmopolitan city. It sits where the Swan River meets southwest coast. Sandy beaches line its suburbs. Perth Cultural Center, State Ballet, opera companies are all there. It's got a vibrant theater, arts, music scene. Really, because it's so geographically isolated, Perth has got all these amazing kind of cosmopolitan amenities, which make it a really kind of appealing city from that perspective. And really kind of a vibrant, it really the only sizable city on the West Coast. So if you're into kind of like the foodie scene or the music or the arts, the theater, the dance, certainly Perth also has some really vibrant creativity going on there. Let's just see here. I'll go advance to my next slide. It might just take a moment. I'm not sure why it's hesitating. Perth is, as I said, it's worth some time on its own, just sort of touring around the city, but as I said, I love doing day trips after I've spent some time in the cities. The Swan River kind of ambles through the city. There's lots of bike paths. It really is a gentle kind of city area. And really kind of makes for a pleasant place to spend some time. Also going to, spending some time in Fremantle. Fremantle is a port city in Western Australia. It's a part of the kind of the Perth metropolitan area. It's known for its maritime history in Fremantle and Victorian culture, architecture, and the remnants from Australia's days as a British penal colony. Pictured here is the Shipwreck Museum, which was a fascinating look at exploring, ships and ventures that had gone wrong in the area. So plan activities around your interests, right? Surfing, biking, snorkeling, or perhaps food, wine, music, and arts. There's, as I said, there's a great kind of foodie and wine culture in Western Australia and performing arts. Many of Australia's famous bands actually, came out of Western Australia and the Fremantle district specifically. Men at Work, In Excess, all of them came out of the Fremantle and Perth area. There's never a bad day when there's a beach involved, is what we like to say. In Australia, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I'm just going to forward the slide here. Not quite sure why it's hesitating, but we'll give it a moment. Sometimes the best beaches take a minute to load. There we go. This is Cottesloe Beach off Perth. Aqua blue water and very fine white sand. I mean, really, can you imagine living in a city and having that on your doorstep? That's the kind of environment you've got in Perth. So if you want to be inspired by other adventures, sign up for my monthly carryonqueen.com e-newsletter. You can do that. Just hop on over to carryonqueen.com. You'll see it as an option to sign up or a pop-up. Or if you want to get in touch with me, Mary@carryonqueen.com, I'd be more than delighted to follow up with you. In summary, pack light, experience more, and that I believe is the best way to approach travel. Here's where to find me, carryonqueen.com. And thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to share this presentation and take you away from an otherwise rainy, wet day in Vancouver and transport you to a lovely place in Australia. Thanks so much.